My 39/M husband wants to kick our 17/M son out as soon as he graduates. And I'm not so sure I agree. Our son is a senior ATM, but he's expected to be graduating this year. He'll be turning 18 in August, and that's when my husband wants to kick him out. He's persistent in his beliefs and unwavering. He wants him to spread his wings, to handle life on his own. That also means we won't be giving him any sort of financial aid, etc. It's not as if our son is lazy. He's a very hard worker and spends most his time cracking the books or at after-school football practice. But he wanted to hold off on college just until he can get a good idea to what he wants. Personally, I found it very mature of him to want to, but my husband disagrees and thinks it's a sign of him being lazy and immature. We've been arguing non-stop. My argument is, so long as he is working and helping out, what's the harm in him staying? Why should one be expected to abandon their kids the moment they've become adults? He's our only child, our baby. I want him to leave when he is ready. Why push him out so soon? I sort of feel that as a mother I've failed if I'm abandoning him so soon when he isn't ready. Move on to the comment. How is your husband's relationship with your son normally? Is your son aware of any of this, or does your husband want to surprise him in his birthday and tell him to GTFO? Does your husband happen to be your son's stepdad? Just clarifying. My friend who had this happen knew. His shit mother loved to tell him she intended to do it, and unsurprisingly, she did, right on his 18th birthday. That must have been fun. Happy birthday. Now, GTFO. She probably sent you message for a while trying to get you to let her in and being all passive aggressive and 100% deflecting blame. LMAO. She's much too stubborn for that. Hell, I had a major surgery a few years ago. It didn't go well and they thought I might die for a while after. They couldn't get a hold of my emergency contact, so they called my mom to let her know things didn't look good. I have no idea how they got her number since I didn't provide it. She never even called to see if I lived. My aunt said that my mom told her shortly after she kicked me out that she did it so I would fall flat on my face and come crawling back to her for help. I was homeschooled, home churched, never allowed outside the house, and completely unprepared for the real world. Apparently she's still waiting for me to come grovel for her good graces. Also happened to a friend of mine. I felt so bad when I found out. She kept it from all of us. She always knew. We knew her home life was difficult, but we never thought it was as bad as it was. On graduation day, her dad and stepmom gave her $3,000, some was her money, and expected her to be out of the house. She ended up moving to a big city in a house with 4 other roommates. She put herself through community college, then university. She didn't really ever talk to her parents though, and she hasn't visited our hometown since she left. Yes, my 18th birthday my family told me we're moving to Utah, but I couldn't come. Apparently ever since I was a baby my mother wanted to up and leave me in the hands of other family and move states. But my stepfather suggested they wait till I turned 18. And they did. Our house was emptied and my mom and stepfather moved to another country the day after school was out. So at 18 I was homeless. It was my grandparents' house and they would have let me stay, but mom had forbidden it. Slept where I could at friends, in a boat etc. for a while. Moved away for uni at the autumn unprepared and failed my first run. Wasted 3 years in a new town being depressed and rather lonely. Eventually found a new career path when I was ready, moved for uni in another town and did well. The world today is not like it was when your husband was 18. Especially since the economy is going to suck due to the coronavirus. Also, the same job that paid a living wage long ago doesn't now, so how is your son supposed to survive? As others have mentioned, you need to veto your husband. If your son doesn't want to go to school, he should contribute to the household in some way, but kicking him out with a high school degree in a shitty economy and no job with no financial assistance is cruel. It sounds like there is more to this than an opportunity to spread his wings. Have you asked your husband what the real reason behind his decision? My oldest son is just a few years younger than this dad. Even when dad graduated from high school somewhere around 1999, it wasn't really feasible to make it on your own right out of high school. Dad is completely delusional if he thinks his son can make it on his own without a decent job and plan. He doesn't want the kid to make it. He wants the kid to fail miserably so he can be right. Ideally, the kid will come back begging forgiveness and telling dad how right he was and swear to do what his father says from now on. That is why I think that there is some underlying reason why he wants to kick out his son in this environment with no warning or help. I don't know. I worked in higher ed for years and I now work in a high school. I've encountered numerous delusional parents who just think that somehow it will be different for their kid. Their kid can get a great job and make it all work. I've often thought it just comes from some level of selfishness on the part of the parent, just a complete desire to be done with child rearing and the expenses and responsibilities that come with it. Personally, that's what I think is happening here. Your husband wants to kick your son out in the midst of a pandemic with most businesses shut down and the housing and school markets absolutely punitive. I'm sure that won't lead to a rift in the family at all. Agree? This is potentially one of the worst times in either the parent's or kid's lifetime to kick the son to the curb and tell him just go spread your wings. Ridiculous. Tell him that he will spread his wings and they will never see him again or meet their grandchildren. This exactly, if they abandon him now, he'll be gone from their lives in the future if the kid has any self-respect. Why pressure the kid to go to college when he's smart to not just sign up for debt when he sees how much the younger generations have struggled with it? Don't forget, during a rapidly shrinking economy across the board in almost all countries, absurdly high entry levels to begin with, which are now even higher with the few businesses that still operate. Go out and spread your wings is terrible advice that was already dated 20 years ago. Now it's basically a death knell to any prospects for his future. At the very best he'll manage to land some subsistency level dead-end job, at worst he'll become homeless and will go deep into debt. Is that your husband's actual child? Does he hate your son for some reason? Do you, or why are you agreeing with this? Also, let me guess, your husband totally did it all on his own, except he likely didn't. Exactly. He will be competing in the workforce against people his age who do have support systems, who will be able to reduce their work hours if they choose to go to school, who will have the means to walk away from bad situations, to purchase appropriate attire for interviews and better jobs without sliding into debt, who can take internships without becoming homeless, who won't lose their job if the car breaks down, who can take a little bit of a risk or a job with a lower entry, but great long-term prospects. More than likely, even if he works his butt off, does everything right and has no emergencies, he will remain years behind the kids who had support for much of his working life. Honestly, it sounds like your husband doesn't want him to succeed or eclipse him. I have a close friend whose parents did this to him after his first year of college. Completely shut off all financial aid or even communication with him, saying that it was for his own good. 2 years later, someone who used to be the smartest and most hard-working person I knew is working as a pizza delivery driver and other odd jobs just to make ends meet. He lives in a crappy apartment in the worst part of town. This is a guy who was the top of his class and voted most likely to become successful. If you want your son to have a good life, help him. That spreading his wings philosophy is bullshit, and in my opinion something that lazy parents use to get rid of their kids. Children are a lifelong commitment and investment, not something to be disregarded after 18 years. I had a friend with the same experience. Valedictorian. Hard-working. After HS, her parents moved away to a small house in a small town and left her and her sister to fend for themselves. She tried to go to college but it was too much and she dropped out and ended up working as a receptionist at a dentist office. My dad kicked me out of home 2 weeks after graduating high school. I bounced around between friends' houses all summer until I could go to uni. Here in Australia, university is free at point of use asterisk, but even so I struggled. I couldn't qualify for student allowance because my dad refused to fill out the tax paperwork because he said I had to do it on my own. He was probably filing fraudulent taxes tbh. My mum tried to send me money but she was living overseas and disabled after a massive stroke, so financially it wasn't much and I felt fucking awful accepting my disabled mum's money. She tried her best to support me emotionally. I worked 2 part-time jobs. I was in a very competitive degree, I had to resit multiple exams because I kept failing them. I remember looking at my classmates with bitter envy who were complaining because they had studied 4 hours last night, wishing I had that sort of time to study. I made nearly no friends at uni because I had no time to socialize. That entire period of my life feels shrouded in a foggy gray haze of exhaustion and depression. My 4-year degree became a 6-year degree after I had to drop back to part-time for 2 years. I had multiple mental health crises. I don't wish it on anyone. I'm okay now. I graduated and started working and I'm alright. But I have zero relationship with my dad. I haven't spoken to him in close to a decade and I don't ever want to. He kicked my feet from under me just as I was learning how to metaphorically walk by myself in an adult's world. If Op lets her husband do this to her son, their relationship with him will be forever strained at best. Asterisk you take out a HECS loan from the government, which you still have to repay, but only once you start earning over $55K/year, no interest accrued, and it's charged at 4.5% of your gross annual income. My college boyfriend had this happen to him. He was a wonderful, sweet, lovely person and his dad lived in another state and was never really present in his life, so when he turned 18 and his mom picked up and moved away, it left him with no support at all. This was over 15 years ago. That guy never got more than that HS education because he always had to pay rent in LA County, so he was busting his ass working minimum wage jobs. What other kind of job will you get at 18, just to keep a roof over his head and keep himself fed? He really tried, but where others could take internships he couldn't even pay college tuition. He struggled his whole life trying to do better for himself but was given a shit position to start. He has never complained about it, but I know in his most vulnerable moments he admitted to feeling abandoned by both his parents. They pretty much consigned him to a life of struggle trying to dig himself out of poverty. Doing that to a good kid is shitty. Edited to mention, they dropped his little brother on him too, BTW. These people sucked. I also love the comments, some deleted, saying things like suck it up and they don't owe you money. What part of always worked and never complained are you missing? Only in his most vulnerable moments did he ever admit to me, his GF of 5 years, that he was just hurt that his parents didn't seem to care at all about his well-being. I remember calling up my dad and thanking him after that convo because while at one point we were so broke we lost our house and had to get food from the homeless shelter, I never once for a second had to wonder if my parents loved me or if they'd be there for me if they could. To the people saying that dumb shit, you view your relationships as transactions, and I feel badly for you. Spreading your wings and bootstrap bullshit is all nonsense. We created society specifically because we do better and accomplish more as a team, with support. It's also incredibly dated. The situation even 20 years ago was vastly different from how it is now. And back then the whole 60s mindset was already ridiculously absurd and not workable anymore. Times have changed, the economy has changed. Mainly because of the people who propagate this idea. They took all they could and gave nothing back. The spread your wings and fly at 18, go be your own person strategy hasn't been a reasonable path to success or even median lifestyle for over 40 years. I went through this same experience 23 years ago. It wasn't as bad as it is today, but 1996 was well past the firm handshake and look the manager in the eyes days. Those days were in the 70s, if they ever really existed. Humans are social animals, they aren't fucking birds. You and I are about the same age. I'm glad I was able to go to college and get my education. But even then, with a college education, it wasn't always simple getting a job. I'm grateful that today I am, so far at least, still employed and able to work from home. But sending out a child into this world at 18, a world with a collapsing economy and global pandemic, is madness. I had a lot of help and support from my family, which was instrumental in my success. In the early 90s basic white girl in the US, could get a minimum wage or waitress job with nothing but a firm handshake. But actually being able to make a decent life on that job was already not really possible. By the mid-90s, finally full-time but still making minimum wage, I did eventually manage to get a 300 sq Fort studio apartment by myself. In subsidized housing. With indoor-outdoor carpeting and a permanent ant problem. I also worked 50 hours a week and still qualified for food stamps. Knowing how much worse the wage-to-inflation gap is now makes me shudder to think what it would be like to live on minimum wage these days. Right? Exactly. My main goal of working hard is to provide for my son now, but also because I want to help him spread his wings. That's my job as a parent. To help and guide. 18 is so young. Even 22 is still so young. My parents were super negligent and it fucked me. I'm 32 and still struggling, behind, and in debt. I could never quite get a solid footing. How is any 18-year-old supposed to completely on their own? They're old supposed to completely on their own. They're old supposed to completely on their